Um, I'll start the colloquia today. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have with us today Roy Brooke. He's the Executive Director of the Natural Assets Initiative. And I'll hand it over to you whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. I know this is probably thoroughly unprofessional, but at the outset, I'd just like to do a shout out to my colleague Kim Neal, who was formerly with us, because I can see her just underneath you. Good morning, Kim. Um, so yes, hello everyone. I understand that this is a group of students, industry professionals, and so on, and that we're interested in talking about the confluence of risk, insurance, natural asset management, nature-based solutions. So that's what I'll be doing a run at. And sort of, I'll talk for maybe 20, 30 minutes, try and leave time for questions. Perhaps before I launch too much further into it, I'll just say who I am. My name is Roy Brooke. I'm the executive director of an organization. It's a Canadian national not-for-profit called the Natural Assets Initiative, and you'll be hearing a bit more about what it is that we do. And I'm based in Victoria, British Columbia, which is the traditional territories of the Esquimalt Songhees First Nations, on whose traditional territory I've made my life. Maybe I'll sort of step way back and say, if so, I loosely understand this group to be insurance professionals and insurance students, or people studying actuarial sciences, amongst other disciplines. And so I'm really I'm happy to speak to this group. And I know that's one of the things you sort of always expect speakers to say, but in this case, the reason it's true is that I think there's a lot of synergy. I think there's ways that we can help each other between this field that is known as nature-based solutions and natural asset management. Um, and I'll explain throughout the presentation what I mean by that. It'll be pretty clear to you how I think that the insurance sector can support what we're trying to do. How can, nature, why is it even relevant to the work that you do? Um, well, all of us have windows. All of us can look outside. All of us can see what's going on in the world around us. And I don't care where you live, and I don't care what you believe, and I don't care if you think that climate change is a thing or not a thing. We can all see what's happening. We can see what's happening in Los Angeles and the Pacific Palisades. We can see flooding. We can see wildfires. Here in British Columbia, we can see towns getting ripped off the face of the earth. And I'm thinking here of Lytton, BC, almost like Old Testament type of stories. And I visit a lot of towns as part of my job, a lot of different communities, and some of them are really in the crosshairs of fire risk, flood risk. They find themselves in what used to be maybe 1 in 100 year return event areas that are now happening a couple of times in a winter. Many of the cumulative risks that have led to this place, it's not something new. Some of these are decades, if not generations, in the making. And so my point in saying that isn't to be gloomy in the slightest. It is to say that we must use our collective ingenuity to harness all available tools and resources that are at our disposal. And I believe, very fundamentally, and I believe that I'll be able to demonstrate here, that how we think about nature, how we bring it into decision making, how insurers think about nature, it's not a magic bullet, it's not a panacea, but it is a part of the solution. We're at the start of the journey of understanding it, but that, people in this call, in this very discussion today, could be part of a growing body of work and practice and solutions. So that's just kind of a few preambular thoughts. I'm going to see if I can advance my slides here. Just give me a second. Okay, can people see my second slide? Just a quick nod. Okay, good. So I've got four key ideas that I'm going to expand upon. The first is that unmanaged risks, they're bad for humanity, and they're bad for business. And I'm paraphrasing, I heard Don Iveson from the Cooperators speak at a meeting in Vancouver, and he said it more eloquently than me, but that was his basic point. Unmanaged risks are bad for insurance business. I mean, you need to insure places, or where are you getting your premiums from? You can't just walk away from everywhere that is at risk. You can't just look at the entire interior of British Columbia and say, ugh, looking a bit risky, guess we're going to walk away. We need to find ways to think about those risks and to manage those risks. The second thought that coexists alongside this is that nature provides a wide range of services. We may recognize that, we may understand that, or we may turn a blind eye to it, but that is the reality. And these can be both infrastructure services, and I'll unpack this a bit, or non-infrastructure services. Nature doesn't have an end of useful life. It's not like a bridge that you can visibly see crumbling after 20 years and that you eventually need to prop up, finally replace. It does have a bit of an inherent plasticity. If I put a pipe in the ground to move stormwater from A to B, and the pipe is 100 millimeters in diameter, well, that pipe's not going to change size or contours because of weather patterns, but nature will. To some degree, it has an inherent adaptability or plasticity. And of course, it also has to be said that nature has no capital costs. It's been here because it's always been here, and so we need to find ways to bring this into our decision making. Historically, and in large measure to the day, our actions say otherwise. Our actions and our decision making suggest that nature is something more or less peripheral, something different or other. Where I live here in Victoria, wherever you live, I don't care where you live, I will go to your community and I will find you examples of this. There are land use, zoning, planning, investment, all kinds of decisions grinding on day in and day out that have, at very best, a narrow and a fragmentary understanding of nature, the service that it is providing, the impacts of service or the impacts of decisions on nature, an understanding of what risks we may be creating. We're not even asking the question, much less understanding the answer in most of our decision making. If I see some a farmer's got some land up for sale on the periphery of town, and I think, wow, well, I can build a strip mall here. I can do my discounted cash flow analysis. I know how much money that mall's going to kick out. I can make a very clear case about jobs. I can make a very clear case about tax revenue to the community. But what was that? Maybe I'm building on, arable land. Maybe I'm building adjacent to a wetland. Well, what was that land doing? What was it providing? What was it providing in conjunction? Well, who knows? I don't know. No one does in most cases. So then the result of that status quo thinking is that nature gets under recognized and overused. So that's kind of the backstory. Unmanaged risks, not good. Nature provides services. Well, what do? Well, natural asset management, I'm going to argue to you, is an imperfect but scalable, replicable, inherently replicable approach because it's based on common asset platforms that everyone's got to use. No regrets approach to bringing nature into decision making. I would go so far as to say that your worst case as a community or as a business, your worst case scenario to adopting asset management, natural asset management is taking a better decision. You may still build your mini mall right adjacent to an aquifer recharge area, but at least you know what you're doing. At least you know and you've thought through the decisions and the consequences and the impacts, and ideally the cumulative impacts in that watershed. So that's a third big area that I want to talk about. The final area that I want to talk about is really specific to the interests of this group, and it's around financing resilience. It's about and it's about the nexus of insurance, insurance policy, practice, writing business, and where this connection could go. And I'm not here to say that I've got all the answers, but I am here to say that there are far better minds than mine right now starting to work on this issue, that progress is being made, and that I hope at least some of you will walk away from this thinking, damn, that was actually kind of interesting, and I'd like to figure out how to be part of it. So I'm just going to unpack my example of nature just a little bit further. This is a picture I took. It's in Whistler, BC. So let's think about it. What are we looking at? We're looking at a wetland adjacent to the town. What does this wetland do? Well, every time it rains, this wetland acts a bit like a sponge on your kitchen counter. It absorbs the water, and the water sort of will trickle out slowly over time. Well, what does that mean to the town of Whistler? It could mean a bunch of things. It could mean that this wetland is contributing to stormwater management, to flood risk reduction, to aquifer recharge, to drinking water filtration. And these aren't kind of notional, conceptual, airy ideas. These are core services that the local government or the regional district are mandated to provide. And this wetland is doing it for free. This wetland also provides, and it certainly does in this case, a bunch of non-infrastructure services. It's in this case, a beautiful walking area. So it has recreational values. It has cultural values, spiritual values. I can't speak to any First Nations issues directly, but I'm sure if I asked the question, I would find out that it had a wide range of important aspects to the First Nations. It certainly provides habitat. It certainly provides, by definition, carbon storage. So that's just a very simple example, and nature's doing this everywhere all the time. So quite apart from the fact that we can look out our window and see the world changing around us, what are some drivers? What are some reasons that we may want to kind of get on the program and think about this? Well, even from a non-insurance point of view, again, I don't care where you live. The reality is your engineered infrastructure is not in awesome shape. It just isn't. All of the engineered stock that is in your community, much of it was put in the ground 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, before asset management in its current incarnation was a thing. So the infrastructure was banged into the ground. Operations and maintenance and predictable maintenance schedules were not as much a thing. We fixed infrastructure when it broke down, which is a bit akin to driving your car, not doing regular maintenance and fixing it only when the engine seizes up. And that's a little bit, how we've thought about infrastructure historically. So we have a third of all Canadian infrastructure in poor, sorry, I've been blessed with this respiratory thing that's going around, poor to fair condition and at risk of disruption. And we have a changing climate putting more pressure on those engineered assets that are in the ground. So what does that tell me just as a human, as a taxpayer? It tells me that I don't want my taxes going through the roof. It tells me that we need to think about different ways, not just to quickly default to expensive engineered solutions, but it tells me that we need to think a little more intelligently about how we deliver services, and that we need to consider all of those things that deliver services, whether they are green or gray. Um, Maybe I don't know if this next point is not an outlier, but the fact is that all of us need homes. I have a home. I want my son to have a home. I want it to be affordable. But in our rush to build homes, homes don't exist. They don't just float around in thin air. They are part of an infrastructure system. That infrastructure system is either cost effective and reliable, or it's not. And in our rush to build homes, it's really important that we think, well, how do we protect the infrastructure system? How do we build houses in a way that we are not eroding the very natural assets that keep these homes worth their name? And, so this is a dominant political narrative and imperative in this country. And so it's another reason, it's another urgency. I could probably think of 20 others, but it's another example of the urgency to think about all this. So now moving into solutions, here's the thing. All public sector entities in this country, they can like it, they can dislike it, it doesn't really matter, but they must adopt modern, structured asset management processes. This stems from, amongst other things, an accounting imperative. And that picture on the left rather, the wheel, is a standard asset management cycle. And the point of it is that all public sector entities, so every local government, but also others, they have to now understand what assets they own, what they rely on, the services they provide, and they have to plan for these over their lifetime. And what's interesting is that the central organizing principle of asset management, as we now understand it, is sustainable service delivery. So if you are the mayor or the director of engineering or public works, I don't care, pick a title, you don't need to care if your service is coming from a gray asset or a green asset, only if it's cost effective and reliable. And what we have is an imperfect but strong and growing body of evidence that says, yes, nature does provide cost-effective and reliable services. And so what you can see on the right are what we, Natural Assets Initiative, our mandate, our mission is to make natural asset management, the application of asset management to nature, a mainstream practice across this country. We don't use asset management because it's the only way to think about nature, because it's awesome or perfect. We use it because it's scalable. We use it because it's replicable. We use it because I can show up in St. John's or Toronto or Princeton, BC, and they all know what I'm talking about, and they all have the same imperative. So we work on the ground, if I can put it that way, with local governments using this methodology. And I won't go into all of all of the tedium of it, but we're basically helping local governments with a growing body of tools to understand what are the nature-based assets that I rely on? What risks do they face? What condition are they in? What's the value of these services? What level do I need them to be at to keep my town safe? How do I contain costs so I don't have to keep passing them along to taxpayers? What actions can I take? And as you go around that wheel, in each of those segments, you will find a growing body of tools, in some cases, norms that say how you can do this work. And this work has now gone from a single isolated example maybe 5 years ago in the town of Gibsons, which really kind of sparked this work in its modern incarnation, to, depending how you slice the numbers, probably 160 odd local governments across Canada, which is awesome, fast growth, but still a drop in the bucket. The progress is unevenly spread, as you can see. I can talk about where, why, what size, but that's a rough idea. So this is good news. This is good news for all of us because it's a way to get at this problem. And if you can start delivering services in a cost-effective and reliable way, services that have real connections to your industry, things like flooding, which is one of the, probably I'm not I'm not an insurance professional, so you'll forgive me if I don't get the language entirely right, but it's one of the fastest growing sources of insured um, costs, and it's off the charts and it's ubiquitous, whether it's coastal, whether it's riverine, whether it's overland. And nature has something to say about that and can help mitigate those risks and thus contain costs. So I'll give of those 160 examples, I'll pick out just one example. Grand Forks, British Columbia, small town, 9,000 people near US border. 5 or 6 years ago, they had flooding at the confluence of a couple of rivers. That community there, I think, if memory serves, is called North Ruckle. It was really slammed hard. I mean, but I could pull up pictures like this from just about anywhere in the country. So what can you do about this? Well, you can build big walls, but big walls are brittle. What they did in the end, we did a whack of analysis with them, and we showed some things that seem kind of blindingly obvious. One, floodplains flood. Two, if you if you kind of get out of the way a little bit and allow those floodplains to flood, they will act like a sponge. They will absorb water. They will reduce risk. To make a very long story short, the town got a whack, city got a whack of money from the feds. They did a bunch of work in this area, including some of its managed retreat. Some of it is dikes and berms and traditional stuff. Some of it is new off-channel habitat and riverine habitat. And what they found out this year, they they were bracing for more floods. They were sort of spared the sword this time, but just they crunched the numbers and they're like, wow, this time there's 500 less people in evacuation zones and 2 kilometers less of temporary flooding protection would have been needed. And this is one tiny town that I'm sure, at least 75% of the people on this call have never heard of. And, we can do this everywhere. This can be done everywhere. These kinds of solutions, they can be done at scale, not just as some cool little pilot project there. That's just one of many examples. And I hope it illustrates, imperfectly, but a very clear connection between risk, natural asset-based intervention, number of people at risk in future events from particular perils, and cost containment. There's plenty of other examples. I mean, we could talk all day about this kind of stuff. I throw this one out there just because it's kind of cool and I really like it. And the point that this guy, Dwayne Nickel, who's just a terrific advocate for this work, makes is that we can't just think about containing risk and managing climate as this standalone thing that's off to the side. Yeah, I'll do my sort of big kid work over here, and over there, I'll do my climate change and risk mitigation work. Like every dollar that goes out the door needs to be put out the door with the lens of risk and climate and future climate scenarios put on it. And what you will see in this community, it's not only about nature, but a lot of it is. And they have baked nature and nature-based solutions into the DNA of basically everything they do. Like it's their asset management bylaws. It's I could go on all day about this one, but even down to job descriptions. If you go and you say, Dwayne, I want to work with you, I want a job here, and he says, great, here's your job description. And then you say, oh, by the way, Dwayne, I don't, this nature stuff, it doesn't land for me. Well, sorry, it's right there in your job description. By virtue of signing up with the city, you have signed up to this work. So it becomes part of the very fabric of the organization. These aren't big money items. This is a bit of leadership. This is a bit of common sense. This is stuff that wherever you live, we can do this. And wherever you live, I can find somebody else who's got the same struggles as you, who's done it. Sorry, nearer to home. This is not applicable to all of you. Grindstone Creek. I won't go into this one in detail. Any of these QR codes you can hit and you can see what we're talking about. This is a much bigger one done at a watershed scale, and it does sort of speak to some of the financing issues that I'm going to get into. I'm just keeping my eye on the clock here. So it's a big, maybe the takeaway point here is you can't just look at tiny little areas. You need to think about full watersheds. That means that, and this is tough, but it's not just about what land does the city own. It's about, well, what about private land? What about ag land? Gibsons will tell you that by the time a single drop of water gets into their aquifer, it's gone through 7 other jurisdictions. We tried to at least begin to get at this challenge of multi-owner, multi-use, multi-jurisdictional watersheds here. Stepping back from work on the ground, again, I could probably spend a day just on this page, but the point is this: if we try to make this work, and this is where it really starts to come around full circle to the insurance world. If we want to make this work mainstream, if we want to make this national, well, it's not going to happen because our little organization's running around doing projects here and there. It's going to happen because a market evolves in this country. It's because a market evolves in which there's demand for this work. So people saying, yeah, this is important. Multiple players who can meet the demand, and then rules for the game. And the rules for the game are emerging. There's a lot going on, and the first QR code will speak to this. There's a lot going on in the accounting world. There's many accounting barriers. On January 29th, you will see dropping the latest, it's not a new standard, but it's something from the Standards Council of Canada that really is sort of a compilation of all applicable guidance on this topic. You will see in the second QR code a national standard, W218. This governs part of the methodology, which just a sliver of it, but it's the inventory part, which is really important. So if Guelph does an inventory according to this standard, or Yellowknife, it's the same inventory. And that's good for insurers because it means you're not comparing apples and oranges. It means, and so the more standardized this gets, the better it gets for insurers. Similarly, in the third bucket, professional practice. Well, it's not just insurers and actuarials who play on this. It's engineers, it's planners, it's public works professionals, it's sort of skilled and unskilled generalists like me. It's it's everyone. And we need professional norms and learning ecosystems. And again, without going into a ton of details, we're making progress there too. So what are the finance and insurance aspects very specifically? Like hopefully to date, you've now sort of at least registered in your mind that, whether I'm in the business or whether I want to get into the business, nature is not just this bystander that I need to stare and look at helplessly. It is something that can be actively engaged with, managed, stewarded in a way that can reduce risks. There's lots of barriers to this work. Some of them relate to funding, some of them relate to finance. I'm obviously don't want to pull any punches there. We've done, I think, a really pretty thorough report for the province of BC that illustrates them. And although it's cut for the province of BC, you take me to your community and I will show you those same barriers expressing themselves in different ways. It's the same 10 or 15 buckets. There's the accounting issues. The accounting and the insurance are obviously, I don't know if two sides of the same coin is appropriate, but you have to get at the accounting issues to get at the insurance issues to at least some degree. Very interestingly, so we are working with RISC very closely with Doctors Ed Furman and Robert Stewart. And what are we doing with them? We're asking the following question. What is the evidence, the specific insurance industry relevant evidence for connections between specific kinds of natural assets and specific kinds of natural asset interventions and specific insurance outcomes? So if you hit the QR code there, you'll see, at least the announcement. Dr. Stewart has completed the literature review, probably to no one's surprise. It doesn't show mountains of hidden evidence where we're all thinking, oh my God, if only somebody had sent me that memo last Tuesday, we would have no problems. It's still thin gruel, but there are some areas that we can look at. There are some very promising areas. Um, some relate to emerging products, as I'm sure you're aware. Um, there's new investment products like parametric insurance. There's Nat Recon. I'm sorry, the name escapes me, but it's the French reinsurer that has put out this product, and they will insure certain perils that affect certain nature-based solution products or projects. So there are new products coming to market. There are other areas for which there is no evidence that I'm aware of that we can still likely explore. For example, um, if I'm an insurer and you want my insurance and you're in a flood area, I might say, sure, I'll insure you, but you're going to do the fire smart stuff because that's going to be good for you and thus good for me. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that there's going to be things that insurers can do that will similarly, you're near a river, or I don't know, I mean, pick an example. There will be things, and it needs to be done thoroughly. I'm not just going to cook them up on the back of a napkin here, but there are things that can be done where, yeah, you want insurance? Great. But here's the things based on a growing body of evidence that we know will reduce the risks. And you want my money, you want my coverage, you're going to do these things. Another thing that we could explore, and I don't think there's a great body of evidence yet around this, and if there is, for God's sake, send it to me, but is to bake this into your insurance and your underwriting policies. I just renewed the insurance on my home. There's very clear policies um, that they are following to, and we have a couple of unique scenarios. My wife runs a business out of the home, so there's some very clear policies that need to be followed for the business to get written. Well, um, starting with, we can find insurers, we can work with insurers to say, well, how would we begin to start writing this into insurance contracts? And also insurers, there's other roles. Insurers are obviously investors. As investors, you have scope 3 emissions. Well, your scope 3 emissions are somebody else's scope 1 emissions. And there's a way to kind of close up that gap. And for us to say, because as I've said, nature clearly um, absorbs carbon, stores carbon. Natural asset management will increase the flow or the sequestration rates. So that's another clear connection. So anyone who's interested in really the weeds, I cannot overstate the brain power that's attached to this. Dr. Stewart is a sort of an interdisciplinary researcher. Ed Furman, who may be on this call, I have no idea, actuarial scientist, cross-posted at several universities. There's a number of other actuarial scientists. This is the best and brightest we have in this country and perhaps in the world. And they're putting their minds to this. This project will run for a year. It will only scratch the surface, but my belief and my hope is that we need to pile a bunch of more resources into this and really get liftoff. And although we have no evidence, does that mean we all sort of weep and go back to sleep? No, it means we try stuff. It means we try projects, we fail at some, we succeed at others, and we gain evidence in that way. That is precisely how all of this natural asset management stuff got started. No one was doing this till they were doing it. We started doing it. We have screwed up some things. We have slammed some others out of the park and everything in between. And so it will be here. The Investing in Watersheds project. So basically, and and I'm going to try and wrap up in sort of 3 or 4 minutes because I want to leave time for talking. One of the barriers, one of many barriers to this work, is that there's not enough money flowing into nature-based solutions. And we that Grand Forks project that I mentioned, at one level that's awesome, great, 54 million. But but when we think about the available federal funding, the entire federal natural infrastructure fund is $200 million. And Grand Forks, which most of you can't find on a map, and I can't, soaked up a quarter of that amount. So like we're not after a couple $100 million. That's not even worth getting out of bed for. We need billions and billions of dollars. And that's just not my opinion. Whether you go to UNEP or OECD, any or the UK Treasury Biodiversity Report, it all says the same stuff. We need way more money. Well, how do you get there? One of the things that we are playing with, not playing with, it's not quite the right terminology, but you know what I mean, is we're trying to find a way to generalize about the stack of services or the pile of services that any watershed provides, and to draw a straight line between those services and people who care about those services. And so, like, who cares that the place doesn't flood? Well, it's not just the town, it's the insurers. It's not just the insurers, it's the province that doesn't have to bail them out. So how do we um, draw a straight line between the beneficiary and the benefit? And how do we put a governance structure around this work? Because it's what we cannot have is in a complicated watershed, 10,000 little contracts. It will never work. It will be way too inefficient. So to ever write that kind of business. So you need a way to kind of wrap it all up together. That's what the Investing in Watersheds project is all about. And I won't go into more details, except to say if we succeed with only 50% of it and fail at the rest, it will still be, I believe, of potentially monumental importance. The final thing, and maybe uh, just a bit of icing on the cake here. If you said to me, "Well, Roy, what's happening in Fort Nelson?" Well, I don't know. Unless I've been on the phone today with them, I don't know. I can't know, and that problem is only going to get worse. We do monitor stuff. Of course, we monitor our projects, but the practice is growing quickly. Insurers and other industries will need data faster than I can do it organically, faster than I can hire um, students who will sort of, do phone interviews and produce a report that's out of date 5 minutes after it's published. So we have a whack of money from RBC Insurance, sorry, RBC Tech for Nature, and we're building out an AI monitoring system. I should say, just speaking of throwing out some names, that the Risk Insurance Project has money and engagement from, and my sincere apologies to anyone I leave out the list, but Cooperators, Wawanisa, Definity, um, Royal Bank Insurance, the BC Insurance Corporation, and a range of others. So it's not just us sort of doing this in a back room. There's a number of others, serious players at the table. So there's a bunch of angles here. Here's my sort of concluding, and oh my God, I was asked to speak for 40 minutes, and I think I'm going to do it like literally within 30 seconds. Um, uh, we One, a dramatic scale up of this work is within reach, but it won't happen by magic. Um, we will have to double down on our current efforts. It will take some energy and investment. That picture on the right, that's Steve Jobs standing outside his garage back in the day, and he'd still be standing outside his garage and working in his mom's basement if he hadn't had investors. There is no Apple computer, there's no Microsoft, there's no nothing without investment. Um, I would also say the money that we need for a scale up of the work that I'm talking about is less than nothing. That picture on the right is Lytton, BC. Um, 250 people live or lived in Lytton. The insured property and casualty costs for one fire in one town of 250 people was 102 million. The response alone was 75 million. So think of those numbers. They're massive numbers in a town of 250 people. I mean, there's probably 250 people who live on my street. Um, and and then the kind of money we need to scale up this work it's a fraction of this. And then finally, insurers, for all the reasons that I've laid out, as investors, as underwriters, as people who need to think about scope 1 and 3 emissions, you are playing a role. Cooperators has funded a bunch of our work. Definity's funded some of our work. Um, you can play a big part, and I really, really hope you do. So I'm going to stop there. I'm 1 minute and 17 seconds over. My deep apologies, and I would love to take questions, have a discussion, and I've got as long as you have.
Does anyone have any questions? Please feel free to put it in the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself.
So yeah,
I
I have a
will.
quick question. So Roy, yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation. A lot of very interesting information. On the insurance side, has there been any discussion with insurers about insuring any of these natural assets?
There, yes, there has been some. Some of it is covered in. Um, some of it is sort of touched on in the insurance report, in the literature review. Some of it is sort of being explored in by insurers. I think some of the challenges that we face, though, link back to some of the accounting issues that I pointed to. Like if I show you a wetland and say, okay, go insure that. Well, what's its value? Um, if I mean, from an accounting point of view, the value is basically zero. But that's even though it may be providing services worth billions or hundreds of billions. I can put a golf shack on it, and all of a sudden we have an insurable asset, or we have something with a financial value. And so, it's tricky, and that is precisely what we are trying to get at with and why this work cannot be considered sort of in isolation from some of the accounting issues. What I would love to see, what I would love to see is an insurer coming to the table and saying, look, we don't know how to perfectly do this. We get that there are some risks here, but what we would like to do is to work with you to understand the value. Because I mean, like when my home is insured, they're not insuring it because, hey, it's a nice place to sleep and we like baking brownies in the kitchen. It's based on a replacement cost of the building and the contents. Like there has to be a number. And so what I would love to do is to find somebody who will work with us to say, right, we know you can calculate service values, infrastructure, non-infrastructure. Let's come up with a way to write the business based on those those numbers. Moreover, let's do it in a replicable way. Because if we sit down and we spend 5 years doing it in some small pilot project-y way, for one little place, but we haven't thought about scalability. Well, look, all we're going to have done is lost another 100 million, whatever, hectares in the meantime. So we have to do it in scalable ways. Yeah, Kim has put in the chat is Swiss Re, and we did a small project with them of maybe 3 years ago, is providing parametric insurance, um, insurance in Canada to cover nature, but somewhat limited to ag and restoration. So there's a lot of limits. I think this is very embryonic work. So maybe we could share these resources in the chat, and I'm just going to screenshot them too while we're chatting. So that's kind of a partial answer. I also put my email in the chat because I know I've given a lot to chew on, but these are That's such an awesome question. These are threads we can pull on. And if my answer is half-baked because there's not, 50 awesome examples, well, let's create those examples. Like there are people sitting on this call that work for an organization or work for a prof or are a prof that, can get shirk money or whatever it is, and we can make these examples. And you know what? Like any other area of human endeavor, some of them will fail. Some of them will be like, wow, that really sucked. That was a useless example, but at least we've learned and we move on. And it's not just feel good. It's not just feel good work. This work has to be done if you want to contain costs. Yeah,
I
sorry, I
think
see a
there's a
hand up.
question. Go
Who's
ahead, Prana.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I had two questions actually. And the first one is like, what are the various funding mechanisms that we can explore so that investment, the scale of investment, that the huge amount of investment that is required can be met with for this natural best solutions? This is my first question. And the second question is like, what role does IT play in monitoring and managing the natural assets effectively?
Oh, wow, those are good questions. So, okay, so the IT question is maybe I'm not like a particular expert in either area, but I work with some of the brightest minds on the planet in these areas. The IT stuff is incredibly exciting and important in the sense that um, using AI, using geographical information systems, using remote sensing, using stuff, and I'm not maybe even going to use the right terminology here, but it's basically sort of DNA-based analysis. You can rapidly and cost effectively determine the health of ecosystems. Now, that word health is a bit troublesome in the sense that, I'm saying that as a white guy, and, a First Nations person might come to me and say, your idea of health and my idea of health are not the same thing. And that's, of course, totally legitimate because there's different worldviews. And, I have mine just because of how I was born. But, the point is that there's a lot of emerging technology that has that can be brought to bear, that is being brought to bear. Like the UK has some interesting development rules that say basically if you develop X, you need to sort of keep biodiversity at the same or better level. Well, how do you do that? How do you know? How do you know it cost effectively and not just in sort of a childish way of counting a bunch of dandelions? Well, you know what? There's a lot of technological solutions out there. So I think this is a vast area. I think the business and business development opportunities are uh, magnificent. And and if I'm going to hazard a guess that you're not as ancient as I am, and if I were 30 years younger, these are the places that I would be looking at to make a fortune, and to do some useful work while I was at it. The first question, I think, if I understood correctly, was around funding and financing, and I would say we need to do it all. I think the Investing in Watershed project is imperfect, but sheds light on where we need to go. We need investors in that project because I still don't have a market-ready product. And like anything, it takes investment. If you go to our website, we need, I forget what it is, maybe it's 800 grand. Just, we need a warm body to help us kind of build this out initially in the Hamilton Burlington area, because that's where we have the data and the partners. And what's cool and interesting is that they have to do their conservation plan now anyway, their watershed conservation plan. Most of those plans sit on the shelf as some dry, dusty report. And without enough money, we're hoping to use this project to bridge that gap. I'm speaking to a group of insurers, or the representative of a group of insurers called Nature Force, about this tomorrow. So we need those kinds of projects because little one-off outcomes-based financing projects where, you know, a rich donor sum comes in and says, oh yeah, I like your outcomes. Here's $100 million. I'm going to write up a contract. Who cares? You know, like you and I will be dead long before we've done enough of those to make a difference. It has to be scalable, or we might as well, you know, all go back to sleep. I will also say that the funding side, the federal funding side, is really important. I'm try and take a bit of credit for the organization for the following. Um, they 6 months ago they were talking about yes, we're going to put out a bunch of money for housing infrastructure. We did a report with Canada's the urban Canadian Urban Institute to say, look, if you're going to do this, for God's sake, don't just, you know, do it old school, do it, you know, in a thoughtful way. Their funding mechanism, the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund, allows nature to be a capital cost. That's huge. You know, that is huge, and that affects billions of dollars. The case that I would make, though, and that I'm making to Industry Canada, that money's not going to mobilize itself by magic. If I'm, you know, if I'm working in a small town and there's 4 guys and, you know, we're stamping development permits and we're emptying the waste paper baskets and dealing with overflowing toilets and fires and everything else, I don't have time to, you know, go and scratch my head and think, oh yeah, you know, I could do this new thing with nature, or I could just go build a dike. Of course, I'm going to build the dike. You know, we need to help people move this money. The opportunity is there. The money's starting, you know, the models are there. The feds, to their credit, are starting to get religion on this. For those people, and maybe people think religion's a bad thing. I don't know, but you know, you get where I'm going with the expression. So there, the signals are positive.
Thank you so much.
I know we're running close to time, and I've got 5 more minutes, but you know, so I don't know how many people there are on this call. I'm just going to have a peek here. You know, let's say there's I don't know, at a guess 20 or so. Let me assume that, you know, 10 of you found this um pretty interesting. 5 of you are like, oh, that's kind of cool, but I don't really care. And 5 of you are like, wow, that was really neat. And I want to do something about it. I mean, you know, all of you, the door is open. But for those 5 who thought, wow, that's really cool, my request, my call to action, think, I work here or I study here. What are my opportunities to advance this work? If you're a student, can you do some research? Can you talk to your supervisor? I'm not an academic, you know, whatever the titles are. Let's get some research money. Contact Ed or Robert or some of the other brilliant minds involved in this project. Figure out a way to get involved in that. If you work for a business or you know somebody who works for an insurer that I haven't mentioned, talk to somebody at that insurer and say, hey, you know what? This stuff does not sound stupid to me. Like, there's lots of insurers we don't have here. We don't have Intact, and they're the biggest in the country. You know, there's many more people that should be at the table. So find a way to get involved. And if you're, you know, and if you're here because you're just in the wrong meeting and you're not insurer at all, but you like what I've said, well, you live somewhere, you live in a community, and there's lots of, we're seeing a growing uptick of people who in their own communities. 5 years ago, we never saw this, but I'm starting to get calls. I got a call from the city of Victoria maybe 2 months ago, and they said, hey, you know, I've got this counselor who's on breathing down my neck. He has got a request from a citizen who wants a motion to go do some of your work. What should I do? I don't know I don't know who the counselor was. I don't know who the citizen is or the group is that's harassing him. What I do know is that that's awesome, because it means that there's people out there that have heard about this and are starting to pester counselors and say, we need more of this, because those citizen voices are starting to make a difference. And I'm getting, you know, not a deluge of calls, but I'm getting more calls from more communities and people in communities who want to light a fire, metaphorically, I hope, under their councils.
All right. Anybody else have any other questions?
Are you recording this?
Yes.
I think it would be great if after you've done this, if if any of this looks good, maybe I can connect you to Emily, our comms person. Maybe we can cut it down, edit it a little bit, and
Yeah.
send it to others. It would take 2 hours of some editing time, cut it down, put in some music, a bit of backdrop, throw in a few slides, and we have a cool artifact that we can then, distill out into 20 minutes and send around.
Yeah, Emily just emailed me asking for the recording, so it will be shared with you and Emily like as soon as it's available. So yeah.
Emily, as usual, is ahead of me.
So yes, I will just conclude the colloquia today. Thank you, Roy, for sharing your insights, and thank you, the audience, for such thought-provoking questions. And have a good rest of your day. I look forward to having you again for our next colloquia.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I wish everyone best of luck in whatever they're doing today.